Hey there, I'm Neil. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the host of my new podcast, Pause and Rewind. I'll be chatting to changemakers, thought leaders, and role models who all share a common goal. They're striving to make the world a more inclusive place. And let's face it, we need it. Each guest has a unique story when it comes to doing their thing, and we often know who people are in the now. But how much do we really know about them? Pause and Rewind takes a moment to explore the experiences in my guest's life that led them to where and who they are now. Because everyone loves an origin story. We'll dive into tales, anecdotes, and what makes our guests tick. So, are you ready to pause and rewind? Hey there, and welcome to this episode of Pause and Rewind, where I am chatting to an actual legend. And it's not every day you get the opportunity to do so. So, when Marc Thompson, an activist with over 30 years of experience of activism and campaigning, said yes, I was absolutely overjoyed. I've worked with Marc very briefly on a couple of events before, and I've followed his career for years. And this podcast is a phenomenal conversation. But just to give you a bit of insight as to who Marc is, if you don't know him, Marc's an HIV awareness and LGBTQ rights activist, a public speaker, an activist, an advocate for Black LGBTQ plus communities and the queer community generally, a thought leader and specialist in health promotion and education. He's worked for so many different organisations, and his impact on HIV and AIDS awareness in London over the past 3+ decades is incredible. He's led on so many campaigns and describes himself as a creative activist. Now, I was absolutely buzzing to talk to Marc, and I'm so excited to put this conversation out there. So, just like to say, please take care of yourself while listening. We do talk about some sensitive topics, including Marc's early diagnosis of HIV when he was just 17. But yes, please do enjoy this conversation. Like, subscribe, share, and yeah, enjoy. Here it is. Hey, Marc, welcome to Pause and Rewind. It is so good to see you.
Hey Neil, it's lovely to be here. I'm so excited to be talking to you today.
I'm always excited to talk to you, Marc. You are, I don't use this word lightly, you are an absolute legend. Decades worth of activism. I've followed your career for such a long time, and you are the perfect guest to have on here. I don't know many people who strive for to make the world a more inclusive place like you do.
Oh, thank you. I just like to think of myself as an ordinary bloke from Brixton, just trying to do a little bit of good.
Well, I mean, I love your love of Brixton, and you describe it as Brixton to the bone, and I love that.
Yeah, yeah, it's my home. It's my forever home. Born, lived, raised, done everything in this area.
Well, I used to work there for a while, and
Uh,
we're not far. We're almost neighbours. I'm just in Penge.
okay, it's not too far.
Not too
Down the
far,
road.
not too far. Um, we're gonna dive into your origin story, and I'm so sure all that everything you've put out there into the world is going to come up throughout this podcast.
hmm
But I want to start with a big question for you. What does the world look like for Marc Thompson right now?
Right now, the world is very quiet. I've recently started a new job. I'm the new lead commissioner for the London HIV prevention program. So I've moved away from kind of grassroots activism. Some people have said I'm poacher turned gamekeeper. Some people have joked and said I've gone over to the dark side. But really, in essence, it means I've got one big job doing one big thing with lots of moving parts, and it's really exciting. But it also means that life is a lot quieter for me right now. I'm much more focused. I'm not kind of worrying about funding every week and keeping a small grassroots organization going. I'm probably just a little bit less creative right now, but I needed the break. I needed the pause from constantly creating things for community. I'm still creating something, but it's much bigger and it's across the city. So it's an exciting time. But yeah, life and right now the world's looking pretty peaceful, pretty good, in spite of the kind of madness that's going on outdoors. I try to keep it sane and quiet and peaceful.
How have you navigated the shift? I mean, it sounds like there's a little bit of relief in there, from the way you was working. Are you missing some of the old stuff?
Well, it's a bit early to tell because, I've only been kind of let's say, out of the old stuff for a few months. I kind of stood down for my position at the Love Tank in March, took a little bit of a breather, then kind of got approached around this job and went for it. So the transition has been an interesting one. I miss my colleagues. I miss
Yeah.
the kind of grassroots bants and the kind of freedom that brings. And I miss my kids at the Love Tank. But on a day-to-day basis, professionally, I'm facing really new challenges. I'm learning new things. I'm able to apply the skills and the knowledge that I've gained over the years into a new space. And, at my heart, I am an activist and I am a fighter, and I'm able to bring that into call it this kind of corporate space. And they kind of knew they knew who they were hiring, put it that way.
I was gonna say, were they prepared for that? I mean, you come with the most incredible track record of organizations and impact. Everything from the Love Tank, Prepstar, Terence Higgins. The list just is never ending. Like what when you think about the massive scale of your career, right? Over 30 years of
Mm.
activism. How do you feel about that?
Do you know, right? I was doing my CV when I was applying for this job, and I don't always look back on my career like
Yeah.
that. I think most of us just kind of get on and do what we're doing, and it blows my mind. It really does that I've packed in so much in those 30 years. And as you get older, 30 years seems like the blink of an eye. I feel like I was 20 just last week, or 25
Same.
at least.
I mean, I'm only 41, but like time just flies by and it doesn't feel like long at all, does it?
Yeah, it doesn't. It doesn't. But then I'm reminded when I look back on my career that I have packed in a lot, and I'm really quite
Mm.
proud of those achievements. And there are moments when I, might be, in a particular space, and I'll just remind myself, if I had only done that one thing, be it the We Were Always Here podcast or created Big Up back in the 90s, that would have been enough. So I like to look back and think, yeah, you've done all right. You're not done too badly.
You've not done too badly. I mean, talk about humble. Yeah, it's incredible. Like you've made such a difference to the LGBTQ community, to Black communities, to Black LGBTQ communities as well. I mean, some of your campaigns, I remember being on the tube and seeing the TFL campaign and seeing the design. Black men loving black men is a revolutionary act, and it was just bam.
Mm.
Like, even that in itself is such an achievement. We're going to go on to some of your proudest moments soon. I'm really excited to dive into your origin story because we know so much about you, Marc. Like you've lived such a public profile since your early days of activism.
Mm.
Um, but I'm sure there are some things that people don't know about you. So, are you ready to pause and rewind?
Yeah, come on, let's do it. I trust
Right,
you.
here we go. Well, always good to hear. Take me back. Tell me all about Little Marc.
So I was born in Brixton in South London. Well, actually, I was just born near St Thomas's Hospital, so real South London. Come from a Jamaican family. I describe my parents and my grandparents as Windrush generation. And I come from a really kind of small, close-knit, working class family. It was just me, my mum, my dad, my sister. Um, and I was a really lucky kid. I grew up in a really safe environment with both my parents there. They were hard workers. They instilled in us really strong values. We were kind of spoilt, me and my sister, because, there was just the two of us. And I think both my parents didn't have a lot when they were growing up. So they wanted to make sure that we had everything that we could possibly want. And I was a really imaginative, creative, curious kid. I knew that the world didn't end in Brixton, didn't end in South London. I just knew there was so much more out there. And I love film, I love music, I love stories. I'd get comics every week, so I'd watch movies like on TV. I'd go to Saturday morning pictures. So I was this really kind of like bubbly kid that was just like had lots of friends and was really sociable. Um, so I was really outgoing and really confident, but I think that's because my both of my parents had kind of looked out in the world and knew what it could be like for young black boys in this country.
Mm.
And I had all uncles, and so they really surrounded me with love, but also taught me to walk with my head held high. And my dad had this really kind of, it used to be really annoying when I was a kid, but my dad would always be like, when I'm talking to you, look me in the eye. Don't look down, don't look away, look me in the eye. And that's really, I hated it because I thought it was
Mm.
disciplinarian, but it's really stood with me because it enabled me as a black man in this world to understand my self-worth and my value.
How much of Little Marc do you see now?
Oh God, do you know what? Not as much as I'd like. There are moments where I see him. I've recently got back into vinyl, and have been like, stocking up quite badly on vinyl, and have been rediscovering some of the music from my teens and younger than that. So I've been buying like old albums or watching old black and white movies again. So I'm not as playful as I used to be, but that curious, adventurous kid is still very much in there.
I was going to say, do you see some of that curiosity and the creative side of you coming through in your work? I mean, you very much talk about being a creative activist.
Mm.
Surely there are bits of that that kind of have flowed through your work as you've gone through the years.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it took me a
Mm.
while to connect the dots, and it was actually my mum that pointed it out to me one day when I'd kind of done a TV documentary, and my mum was like, "You're doing all the things you wanted to do when you were little," and I just stood back and I was like, "Oh shit, yes, she's right."
Yeah.
Because I wanted to make film, I wanted to write story, I wanted to put together productions, and my health promotion work and my activism, they're productions, right? So when you put on an event in the community, it's like producing a Broadway play. I mean, I'm a bit camp, so that's the way I look at it. But when we pull these things together, if we're not being creative, then they're not fun and people don't engage in them. So yeah, my creativity of that young kind of kid who used to, create shows with his sister and my cousins still lives on in the work that I do. There's a freedom in what I do.
I love that. That's beautiful. It's so much of what you said about how you were is how I was as well. Like that kind of creative, it's sometimes a little bit wacky in terms of my ideas and stuff. I definitely like to inject that into what I do and how I engage with people as well.
Mm, yeah. I mean, me too. I've always, as I said, I was always a sociable kid. I was that kid who's, people would come to my house after school, and even when I was a young baby gay, my mum would allow my baby gay friends to be in the house. I was always really, really sociable and outgoing. As I've got older, that's kind of slimmed back a
Mm.
bit, just because I'm a bit quieter. But yeah, that person is still there.
And do you see the influences of growing up, like being kind of like held and loved and have people that kind of like, showered you with love, and then that, but also that really caring figure, you said about, your dad would look you in the eyes and tell and say, look me in the eyes and stuff. Do you see that in how you've shown up for your community? Because you are such a kind of like, a role model, a community carer and builder. Do you see some of those lessons in how you've kind of created community and nurtured community?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. It's not something I think about often, but yeah, I
Mm,
mean, the stuff that our parents passed down to us, good and bad, really impacts the way that we engage
mm.
and view the world. And I think the fact that my parents did love me, did hold me, and gave me a sense of confidence and safety put me in a very privileged position in the world, right? So when I went out into it and I saw people who had less than me or who hadn't had that loving, supportive family environment, I was like, well, what can I do with my privilege to make that better for somebody? So, as I said, there were lots of my friends when I was in my teens and my early 20s who couldn't celebrate their identity or their sexuality. So I made sure, that I had a good relationship with my mum so my friends could come in my house. And so that stuff of just being good and kind to people generally kind of comes from my mum and my dad and my grandparents.
Yeah. That's beautiful. We had a little chat before this, and you said how your nickname used to be Little Marc, and love that. Um, what were you like at school? I'm getting the feeling you were a bit bubbly, a bit, sociable, cheeky, outgoing. What was school like for you?
there are two distinct phases, I think, for most people at school. There's primary and then there's secondary.
Right.
Primary was a lot of fun. I went to a
Yep.
really small school, it was the 70s. I was the boy that all the girls wanted to hang out with because I was fun and I would play Charlie's Angels and I didn't play sports. I wanted to do gymnastics. I was that kid. And it was a really safe space and I felt really happy there. I didn't excel. I loved writing stories. I wasn't good at the sciences or the maths, but I felt really nurtured in that small space. And then when I went to secondary school, I went to an all boys comprehensive in Brockley, so near
Okay.
Peckham, deep in South London. And it was, for the first couple of years, it was absolutely fine. I got into lots of fights. I was always fighting at school because I was defending myself. I was a small kid, small in stature. But again, another thing that had come from my dad was, don't let anybody beat you.
Mm.
And so I would always stand up for myself. I mean, if you were a fifth year, 6 foot, and you bullied me, I'm going to throw a
You
punch.
didn't give a shit.
I didn't give a shit. I was always ready to fight you. And I would get beaten up, but they would never trouble me again.
Mm.
So that's what I was like. But then as school progressed and I became more excited and interested about the world. I like pop music, I like fashion, and the boys in my school like football. They liked, just basic stuff which I was just not interested in. And so I had a really small clique of friends, and we all liked fashion. So, we would buy the Face, we would buy Blitz, and we would like want to be these people that were going to the Blitz Club or going to Soho. So I had this imagination that the world could be better, and I just needed to get out of school. And as soon as I got the opportunity to, like, 15, did my last exam, I was out at the door. But yeah, the last couple of years were really, really tough.
Mm.
Really tough. But the first couple were a bruise.
Yeah. Secondary school, such a rough ride for us queer kids, right? It can be,
Hmm.
if you are not stereotypically, into sports, which I wasn't.
Yeah.
Actually, that came much later in life for me. And now I really am. Looking back, you wouldn't recognize, but those few years can be rough. What did your, like, from being that confident kid to going to then experiencing that at school? What was your parents' reaction to that shift of like having a hard time?
It wasn't something we spoke about.
Mm,
It was one of those things you just toughed out.
right.
I'd come home from school with a black eye or something, and my parents like, you should be fighting at school and that kind of thing. And I'd go back in the following day and I'd have another fight, and I'd put a report and all of those sorts of things. But I think I think because essentially they knew I was a good kid.
Mm,
They weren't necessarily academically minded, but they knew if I kept my head down and I did what I needed to do to get through it, then I'd be okay. So that they weren't necessarily engaged in my schooling like that. But it also wasn't something for me to go home and say, oh, I got picked on today. It was like, you need to go in there and stand up for yourself because the world isn't easy out there.
yeah. A different time, right?
A very different
A
time,
very, very
very
different
different
time.
time.
You left school at 15. What did you have in mind of, that question of what did you want to do when you grow up? What was the goal that time?
I had two things. My dream was that I wanted to work in film. I absolutely loved cinema, and but I didn't know that that was possible. I
Mm,
didn't know what the roots were or anything. So I had to go to college because I left school, and my mum and dad were like, "You're not going out in the world." So I went and did a youth community and social work course, which is quite telling given where
yeah.
I ended up, right? And so I did this diploma in social work and I did O level and A level film studies. Um, but midway through my A levels, I was diagnosed positive, and so everything went through the roof. And I finished my diploma, and I left. But my ambition was then to kind of find work in film. But again, I didn't have any inroads into it at all. So I ended up kind of just like bumming around doing different jobs for a few years. But there was no great big, this is what I want to be when I grow up.
What was obviously your HIV diagnosis came, was really early, right?
Mm,
17, I believe.
yeah.
Before that, what did your teenage years look like as a young queer black kid? Like for many of us, teenage growing up queer is hard, right?
Mm,
Teenage life generally, really
mm.
formative, changes in our bodies, first relationships, first realizations. What was your what does your teenage years look like, and what was your sense of self in the world?
I mean, like many of us, it was a combination of total utter confusion,
Mm.
shame, fear, also for me, curiosity and excitement, that, oh, I am different and that's
Yeah.
fine. I kind of understood my desire earlier than my emotional state. I knew I fancied boys. I looked at gay porn I could steal from shops. And
Same.
you're right. And I knew that I liked boys. And if what I thought, what I always think is interesting reflecting back, Neil, is that I didn't have any shame about that part of my identity. I didn't look at magazines and think, oh, that's really bad. I was like, I fancy what I fancy. And I really thought in my head that I could have both. I would be able to have a heteronormative life with a wife and kids
Mm.
and have this thing on the side. But then when I had my first crush when I was about 14, it threw me, and that's when all of everything went up in the air. Like this is serious, because I felt this way about girls, but I've never felt this way about anybody, and I feel this about a boy. But when I started to process it, and I was really lucky, I had a fantastic head of year who was really progressive, really, really kind. And I told her, and she was really, really supportive. And I was really lucky that I was able to tell two of my best friends at this working class comprehensive school, and they were like, "Yeah," and and I was like, "What?" So I was really lucky in that
Mm.
sense. I once I'd accepted that this is what I was and I couldn't change it, and the few people around me that I could trust said I was okay, then I was able to kind of start navigating stuff a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, that's beautiful, and it's definitely something
No.
that not everyone gets. Um, what was home life like with coming to terms and coming out at home?
Well, it was difficult because my mum and dad were going through marital problems at the time, which were really, really challenging for us as a family. And my dad was, sorry, a pretty hardcore Jamaican man. And whilst he didn't espouse homophobic views in the house, I knew that he was anti-queer.
Yeah.
Um, I knew my mum was much more liberal, progressive, because she worked in social work and she'd said a few things over the years. So I kind of stored those. Um, but when I told my mum that I was gay, she immediately started to do stuff to disentangle herself from my dad
Okay.
so that I would be in a safe place. And she did that within 7 months. Within 7 months of me coming out, she left my dad.
Right. As and Do you now see that as a direct result?
I think it was a catalyst.
Hmm.
I think it would have got there eventually, but that made motivated her much quicker. Because I think it was one of those things. My mum's biggest fear when I come out, which I always tell the story, because I mean it's hilarious. My mum wasn't concerned about me being gay, because this is the 80s, and so her view of gay people was that very often young men could be corrupted by older men. And my
Okay.
mum's biggest fear was that I would end up being a rent boy in Piccadilly Circus. She's like, I'm just concerned that you might, and little did she know I was giving it away for free, but
As we all do,
as we
right?
all do. So yeah, so in that sense, I was lucky,
Mm.
to kind of be able to navigate and negotiate that in my mind with
Yeah.
support.
Did you, if you don't mind me asking,
Hmm.
did you get to have some conversations with your dad about it? And how did they go?
Well, it was when I was 21. I'd left my mum's house by then. I was living alone, and my dad found out that I was gay. He was told I was gay when he was having a homophobic rant in a pub in Brixton one
Right.
day. And somebody said to me, "Your son's a faggot." And he got into an altercation, and he called my mum, and he came and saw us, and I was shitting myself.
Mm.
Um, but I just said to my dad, "This is who I am. This is the man that you've raised." And my dad said, "You're my son and I love you." And it's hard for me to understand. It's hard for me to accept that you're my son, and that's all that matters.
you still remember that conversation in detail and how you felt?
Absolutely, I do. Absolutely. Because me and my dad had a really tough relationship, and my dad never told me he loved me. And so for him to tell me that he loves me in that moment where he's learning about my sexuality, and my dad never really accepted it and he never really understood it. But for both my parents, the primary thing in their lives was the love of their children.
Mm. That really shines through in kind of like how you're kind of like reminiscing about it. Um, let's just jump back to your HIV diagnosis because obviously
Yeah.
that happened, when you were 17. Did you tell your parents about it?
Uh, I told my mum about 3 or 4 months after, probably about 2 or 3 months after my diagnosis. I
Mm.
never told my dad, and he died when I was 25. But yeah, yeah, I told my mum.
Yeah. And was she, what was her reaction and do you still remember that like how that felt, how those conversations felt?
Yeah, it was an awful time for
Mm.
me to tell her. I was a mess when I told her because I told her I'd gone for a test and I told her it was negative, so I had to come back and tell her it was positive. So there
Right.
was all of that. Um, but she was stony cold calm.
Okay.
She was absolutely calm. Not calm as in shocked, but calm as in this is a place that I need to be right now for my son, and anything else would be madness. I would not be supportive. And she's pretty much been like that ever since around it. I know inside she was crushed.
Yeah.
I know she spent years in isolation, fear, and loneliness that she had nobody to talk to, nobody to turn to about it. And she had to really worry that I was going to die.
And I guess it was, it wasn't long, before that you'd had your realization about being queer. Like, and 17 is so young. A lot of people, I mean, I know people are coming out a bit younger now,
Yeah.
but I didn't come out till I was 17.
Hmm.
You'd only had those realizations for a few years beforehand, and then you're dealing with a mammoth life-changing thing like that
Yeah.
without any of the education that we have now.
Yeah. Yeah. It was terrifying. I don't, I mean, I speak about it a lot and I have spoken
Mm.
about it a lot, but I always think it bears reminding and repeating that it was a terrifying time. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I had only been out a year and a bit. I'd been out less than a year when I was
Mm.
infected. Um, and so, and you asked me what my kind of teenage years were like in that year between me coming out in 1985 and me being diagnosed in November 1986. I had this not an amazing time in terms of a queer life,
Mm.
but I had this amazing time as a young man. I had a really lovely job in a bar in the city. We'd go to warehouse parties, me and my mates. I'd meet guys at pubs. There was a real freedom that
Mm.
I was experiencing. Plus, my mum and dad weren't together, so I had that freedom as
Yeah.
well. So there was lots of stuff which was going on in my personal and my social life, which was really exciting. And when I got my diagnosis, a curtain came down on that.
I was going to say, do you feel like you lost some of those carefree years that you perhaps should have had?
I'm not sure if I lost the carefree years because I didn't go under a bunker and sit in my house,
Mm.
right? I continued to party. I lived.
Yeah.
You know, I think that an innocence
Yeah.
disappeared. I
Okay.
think an innocence disappeared, and it wasn't just around my diagnosis, it was also around the reactions of the people around me,
Mm.
in my Black gay community. I'd gone from being really hopeful, really connected, and with people to understanding that, and we don't talk about it enough, that our queer world can be really toxic
Yeah.
sometimes, especially in close-knit communities and circles. We all fall out of our friends. Everybody does that. You don't have to be queer, but there can be something sometimes quite insidious where we turn in on each other and we eat each other. And I think when you're in a period of an epidemic where people are frightened and they're scared and they don't have the answers, they turn onto each other even more, as we have seen recently with COVID.
Yeah.
So I think for me that it really shifted an innocence.
Yeah. What was your next steps then in terms of how you worked through it? and found yourself in activism?
I just got on with life. Do you know what I
Okay.
mean? There was no like miracle thing that happened. I just kind of got on with life, and I went to work. I dropped out of college because I was like just not going in. So I kind of finished my diplomas, and my mom was like, you're either going to go to work or you're going to go back to college. And I was like, fuck it, I'm going back to work.
Right.
And so I started to work, and I worked admin jobs. I worked for the Department of Social Security, worked for BT, then ended up in the probation service for a few years, and all of these things were just not dead end. There was no future because I didn't see myself having a future. These were jobs which paid the bills, allowed me to have a nice holiday. I loved clothes. I loved going out. I loved smoking. I loved drinking. So it afforded me all of those things. And it was only in 1993 when I had a boyfriend who lived in the States, and I decided to go and live with him. And I packed up everything in London. I had my own flat. I put it out for rent, and I was going on this big adventure in the US. I mean, long story short, I was back home within 3 months, nowhere to live, out of a job, back at my mum's house on the couch. So it all went belly up. But what that did was I had this absolute year of being in a complete wilderness.
Hmm.
And then activism kind of found me.
Okay.
And there was a couple of black gay men that were doing some work around HIV in the community. I was going to the Landmark Day Centre, Landmark Support Centre for people with HIV, and people just, I think it was that confidence again, right? It was
Yeah.
that confidence. I was invited to do a talk to a bunch of volunteers about my story, and the performer, the creative. I was like, oh, I like this. And that just kind of snowballed into me doing workshops to tell gay men how to stick condoms on bananas and how to rim through a dental dam, and we used to have these condom relay races and stupid shit like that. So yeah, that's kind of what got me into it was performing, but then slowly realizing as a positive man who'd had a negative experience, there was this subconscious thing of me going, if I do this work to educate men, they may be less cruel to me and they may be less cruel to other men like me.
I mean, that's such must have been such a light bulb moment of like, I'm doing something that I really love and I'm going to use this for the good of the community. Would you say that that was your first kind of like stepping into being this community role model and thought leader that we see now?
Yeah, I think the way that you just thought leader, role model, that comes much later. But yeah, definitely these are the first steps of
The
me
first
kind of
steps, yeah.
stepping into like understanding that black gay men have particular needs
Yeah.
around, particularly this is around HIV prevention at the time, but also around community, and we should build that. And we were also at the time, me and my comrades, let's call them that, were looking to the US and the works of Joseph Beam and Dr. Ron Simmons and Essex Hemphill, and we were going, oh, right, there's a model for us. And I think what appealed to me was that black queer activism in this country at that point, up to that point, had been political with a capital P. We got to march. We're gonna have a centre, and I was like, no, I want to go down the club and party. Do you know what I mean? I want to fuck,
Right.
right? There was that. And the work that we were doing in the early 90s was actually, no, we can have fun to do this. So we would run a workshop on a Sunday afternoon, then we'd all go to the club in the evening. So there was a real sense of doing good, but having fun and enjoying yourself and being creative inside of it.
Did you in the back of your mind,
Mm.
obviously still the 90s, still,
Hmm.
before kind of like, a lot of protection and life-saving drugs and stuff. What was your mindset around kind of maybe your mortality and fear around, having HIV?
Oh, I thought I was going to die. I mean, I mean, that was it. I mean, I imagined my death scene so many times. Being the drama queen I had, I'd filmed it. I knew it was going to be at my bedside. The music was chosen. Several tunes were chosen for my funeral. Um, but I didn't fear it.
Mm,
I didn't spend every waking moment thinking, oh my God, today could be the day. Yes, if you got a cold, I had night sweats, I'd get thrush, I'd have all of these things, and I would worry that it would progress. But I was really fortunate; it just didn't. And so I suppose the best way to describe it was I just kept putting one foot in front of the other. That's all I
yeah.
kept doing, and see where that would take me.
Was there a moment, the trajectory of your career, you can see it really clearly, like from those first moments,
Mm.
of working in small communities and through to the massive impact that you've had over three plus decades. Was there a moment that you perhaps stopped putting one foot in front of the other and thought, this, I'm really able to achieve something?
No, I mean, I don't think that probably came till much later in my
Mm,
career. I was constantly on the move, and I think I always
yeah,
have been. I've never really paused. There have been moments where I've taken myself out of community work or out of the community to focus on my personal life and to focus
yeah.
on home, because that was really important, focus on family. And I did that after I did Big Up. I took a couple of years where I just went and I worked on, to develop my skills around other health promotion work and understanding the theory of that. So there was never that moment where I thought that. There was one time in 1997 where I had my kind of Damascus moment where I realized this is why I do what I do. No, I realized I got diagnosed, infected and diagnosed to do this work. I had a moment. I was in Washington D.C. and I'd gone to Black Gay Pride, which was like a really important event, and I'd gone to a service, a kind of church service for Black queer people, and there were queer people who were dying of AIDS up on the stage, celebrating and testifying their lives. And I realized one, I wasn't alone because I'd always felt alone with this.
Mhm.
Um, and two, my life could be celebrated. And I remember calling my mum that day and going, it's going to sound crazy, but I know I got this virus. I got this virus to make a difference in this world.
What was her reaction?
Stop being so fucking ridiculous. She probably didn't swear. She was like, all right, babes, okay, fine. Yeah. But then she probably got off the phone and was like, he's probably right.
That was it an element of a mixture of kind of an aha moment, the confidence, the sudden realization that everything you'd been working towards was all coming together.
It was more about it motivated me, right?
Okay.
It gave me confidence in myself and it motivated me to keep going forward, keep developing your career, keep learning new things and building. That's what you're here to do.
What has kept you going over all these years? There's been so much progress when it comes, a lot, so much driven by you in terms of the London community, particularly for the Black LGBTQ communities across London. What's kept you going over all these years?
Because we haven't won. The battle is still there. I said earlier, I'm a fighter, and as what I have this phrase that I use, which I thoroughly take it from somebody else. That if one of us is unwell, we are all unwell. And I don't see that, everybody in our community is happy, well, satisfied, content with their lives. We don't all have access to, you know, life-saving medication. We don't have access to homes, to good mental health, to money, to community, to friends, to love. And I just want to make sure that as far as I can make that possible, I can make it possible. I know I can't do it for everybody, but I know by just existing and breathing in this world, I can make it better for just one person. So I just think ultimately, we haven't won.
And therefore the need to keep showing up as
We have to.
as you are still doing.
Yeah.
Does it feel weird taking a step back with that mindset?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, it's totally weird. I mean, you know, but I'm still making change,
Mm,
right? And I recognize now that you can make change inside and outside,
yeah,
whatever the systems are. You know, I've done work with corporates before,
yeah,
and just sometimes me just rocking up and doing a talk to a corporate makes a huge amount of difference to those
absolutely.
people's lives that day. So whilst I need to maybe pat down some of my stuff and some of my
Yeah,
activism, I also am I've always been a smart activist. So on one hand, using all the tools and experience I've got within the system to make a change and make a difference, but also recognizing that there are limits on what we can expect as
mm,
activists. And that's been a deep lesson for me, is that we shout and we want a lot of stuff and we want it quickly, but the world doesn't operate like that. And I think also for me, it's about professional development. I don't always do this just for the good of community in the world. I want to learn stuff. I want to,
yeah.
earn good money and have a nice life and, look back on my career and my legacy and say, right, this working class boy who left school at 15 is now one of the leading blah, 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 blah in the country.
How, I'm going to ask you to sum up your origin story shortly, but how would you sum up your career?
Oh, God. How would I sum up my career?
Yeah.
God
It's
damn, I've never
such a
been.
journey.
It
It's
is a
such a
journey.
wild
It is a
journey,
journey. It's a
right?
wild
Like,
journey. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I just throw things off the cuff, but I'm like the little engine that could,
I'm like
right?
the little engine that could.
My career is like the little engine that could. This little man came along and had big ideas, was like, I'm going to make this happen. And I look back at all of the things that I've done, some of them small, some of them big, and they've all kind of made a difference.
Yeah.
Um, but I think ultimately the fact that people like me, men of color, people of color, queers of color, have a voice, a seat at the table. And if they don't have a seat at the table, there are people at that table going, why haven't they got a seat at the table?
Yeah.
Because I've been bullshit enough to sit in those tables and go, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
So yeah, I've never answered that question before. It's a really interesting one.
Yeah, and I'm like the little engine that could. I love that as a, bit of a mic drop moment for you there, Mark. Um, we're shaped by our failures as much as we are our successes, right? Has there been a moment that felt like a bit of a career failure that looking back was like, actually, this bit of the making of me?
Not so much early in my career, later in my career, yeah. I've been, I think quite recently, before I kind of went to the Love Tank, there was a period where I went to work for a big national charity, and I was bedazzled by
Mm.
being headhunted and, thinking this is exactly where I need to be at the pinnacle of my career after all of this work. And I kind of realized that no, they wanted Marc Thompson, the
Okay,
brand.
right.
They didn't want Marc Thompson, the activist with the ideas. It was we can go, we've got a leading black queer activist in-house now. And I think that for me was a lesson,
Yeah,
to do the things that I really love doing, I truly believe in, but also to look at the people that are offering me, dangling the carrots and
yeah.
saying, no, I don't think so.
Having experienced that really, really recently, um, for anyone that wants to know, look back at my LinkedIn career. Um, that really resonates with me and
Yeah.
and to really look deeper at what you're being offered.
Mm, mm.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
That's all right.
Um, you happy to talk to me about someone who shaped you the most along the way?
Yeah. You know, personally, I mean, it would be my mum.
Mm,
On a personal level, it'd be my mum that shaped me to be the man I am in many, many ways. Um, and professionally, I would say, and this would say my community of people living with HIV,
yeah.
and those allies in that community have really, really shaped me because they've taught me that anything is possible in spite of the fact that the world doesn't want us, doesn't love us, doesn't care for us. And they've taught me to be adventurous, but they've also allowed me to be smart
Yeah,
and to understand that I am smart.
you are.
Well, I mean, I think, because we live in a world where academia is valued, where a
Yep.
degree is valued,
Yep.
and I've worked in multiple spaces where I'm the only person in that room that has a couple of O levels, but my voice and my views are valued.
Mm,
And that life experience, and it's not just life in its glibest sense, but my
yeah.
life and my professional experience really counts for something. So I walk with a lot more confidence now, knowing that, you know, I've got a PhD as valuable as anybody else. I just didn't spend 4 years with my nose in books for it.
I mean, you're so right. And when we look at the value placed on education,
Mm,
and we look at still so many of the problems going on today around educational attainment, particularly
hmm.
attainment gaps for, young black men,
Yep.
there is still such a lack of appreciation for experience, life experience, and people not necessarily needing that education to make a difference in the world.
Yeah, yeah. And if I can, I'll just share with you something really quickly, which had literally
Yeah.
just popped in my mind. You're talking about education. So I told you that when I came out of school, I told two of my best friends. One of my best friends, a guy called Michael, black guy, working class, exactly the same background as me. And Michael was going to be a professional football player, and he had an
Mhm.
injury at 21. And he kind of wandered in the world, but then he decided to get into welfare and mental health because he'd suffered poor mental health. He's now just got his PhD. He is the head of well-being at the FA. Now, we often talk whenever I post, like, oh, look at me, my new big job. He'll message me and he'll be like, Samuel Peep, South East London, didn't do too bad, did it, for us working class fat boys? And I'm like, you see, because when you believe in people, and
Yeah.
Michael came from a strong background like mine, when you instill in young people confidence and a belief in themselves, and if we do this with our young queer kids, and this is why I do the creative work that I do for young queer people and mentor young queer people, because if we believe in them, they can do anything.
That's beautiful. I'm writing that down just because it's so important. It's so important right now with so
Hmm.
many of the conversations that are going around and what people generally, but what young people are having to deal with
Absolutely.
still to this day.
Still to this day.
Does happiness and success look and feel how you thought it would?
No, it doesn't actually. No, I thought that happiness and success would mean shitloads of money and a wonderful boyfriend and, holidays around the world and all that kind of stuff. That's what I thought it would look like.
Mm,
Whereas happiness is contentment, it's peace, it's tranquility in my own space and the ability to do, and
yeah.
the freedom to do what I want to do in this world as a older black queer HIV positive man. And I think all those identifiers that we throw out are really important, but I found happiness now in my mid 50s, but it's peaks and troughs. If you'd interviewed me 2 years ago, I'd be like, this aging thing is not a good look. It's not the one.
You embracing it now?
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
because I my Saturn has returned.
Okay.
Um, and I feel like, yeah, my planets are aligned again. So yeah, success and happiness is pretty good.
Amazing. My final question for this segment is
Mm.
looking back, and you've got such a lot to look back on, and this might be difficult for you to answer. What are you most proud of to date?
Ah, I mean, I think when I look across the grand scheme of things in terms of my work, it's the fact that I'm still here doing it, and people still value and like what I do. And I think to be able to do that after 30 years and people still like you, respect you, want to hear what you've got to say is really important, because I know lots of people over the years that have got burnt out, have fallen by the wayside. I said some stupid shit on Twitter and so have got cancelled. All of those sorts of things, right? So, or drugs and alcohol. So the fact that I'm here to tell the tale makes me really,
Mm,
really proud. In terms of stuff that I've done, I think the two things which kind of always come to mind are Project 100, which I did at Positively UK, where I set up a peer mentor program for positive people, first of its kind in the country, 700 people trained, and I saw the real difference that did to the lives of people living with HIV. So that's that. And I think secondly, in terms of my Black gay men's work, it's me, him, us. The campaign that I did with what was then GMFA LGBT Hero. I was invited in as a consultant, and I just had this idea in the shower one day. It was like, and I banked it. And then one day I was talking to Liam, who works there, and he was like, "Oh, we got to do this." I was like, "Got a great idea." And then before you knew it, we had one of the country's, most modern, up-to-date, forward-looking campaigns with young Black gay men, and it ran for like 3 different iterations. So the fact that I got to see that outside my Tesco's in Brixton on a bus shelter, come on.
love it. I love it. It must be such a sense of pride to see that come to life.
Well, I mean, I think yes, because it was an idea that I had in the shower and then it
Yeah.
came to fruition, like most of my ideas do. But I think more than anything, I've got a picture of me at one of our photo shoots. So I'm sitting in this big chair and I'm surrounded by about 14 or 15 young Black gay men, you know, and I'm sitting there like all regal, surrounded by these young Black kings. And that summarizes for me kind of where I want to sit in the community. But also I look across that picture, and so many of those young men have gone on to do some incredible things in our community, in the public space. And I look at them, I'm like, look at my young nephews. That's what I'm proud of.
The House of Happiness is London's ultimate sober clubbing extravaganza. We're led and delivered but created for all, whether teetotal, sober curious, or just taking a booze snooze. We love a day rave, and on a Saturday afternoon you can expect banging house tunes, DJs on decks, dancers on podiums, and a fully stocked alcohol-free bar. Flamboyant, bold, with a glitter station to boot. We're all about safe, inclusive fun, and we even have a pre-meet so that you can make new sober buddies before you hit the dance floor. Grab your tickets from Instagram now at House of Happiness Official, and we'll see you on the dance floor. Mark, are you ready for some quick-fire questions?
I am indeed.
Okay, what album, book, or movie has had a lasting impact on you?
The album would be Introspective by the Pet Shop Boys.
Okay.
Uh, People are always surprised when I say that because it's the greatest house music album of all time, in my opinion. And the Pet Shop Boys are my favorite band, and it always surprises folk. But they got me through the 80s and they got me through the 90s. And I think in terms of Britishness and the way they craft music, but it's also based in house and dance music, it always speaks to me. So that's always got me through. And in terms of books, it would be the works of Toni Morrison, the African American author. I mean, I go back to her books every single year. And yeah, those would be my music and my books.
Amazing. What's a saying you live by and one that you'd put in the bin?
The saying I live by is what doesn't come out in the wash will come out in the rinse,
Okay.
because it will always come out, no
Yeah,
matter what. Shit will always
absolutely.
come out. And one that I've got to put in the bin, I thought very carefully about this. And yeah, I'm going to leave this one because the one that I've got, it's somebody's phrase that they use a lot.
And you don't want to shit on it.
I don't, well, I don't want to shit on it because it might be misread, but I
Okay.
have my reasons for why I want it to go in the bin.
All right.
I can tell you when we stop recording, I'll tell you what it is.
Not for anyone listening. What has been the best adventure of your life so far?
Oh, wow. The best adventure. I mean, the past 55 years
Hmm.
have been the best adventure, right? That
Life.
I've seen the world. I've met amazing people. I've fallen in love with some stunning, beautiful men who have loved me back. Sometimes it's gone to pot, but that is life. I have a wonderful family. I have wonderful nieces. I've got an amazing, great niece. So yeah, this has been the best adventure.
And still
It's a gift,
going.
and it's a gift.
Yeah.
This is the thing. This is the thing for me, is that my life is a gift. So that's the adventure.
What three words would you use to describe you and your origin story?
There's an old Jamaican phrase, um, which we use, which is kind of describes Jamaicans in Jamaica. We're little but we're talawa, which means we're small but we're mighty. And I think that probably sums me up. I'm
Small but
small,
mighty.
small but mighty. I'm a little 5'6" package that comes with a great big punch. But that punch is filled with love.
Ooh, that slaps. Let's fast forward a little bit. What exciting things do you have coming up?
I think exciting things coming up is kind of first of all going to get into grips with the job and what I'm going to be doing across London around HIV prevention. I'm so excited about making a big difference to gay, bisexual, other men and sex with men, queer people's sexual health, but also Black communities' health and well-being. Those two things really excite me. On a personal level, I'm off on holiday quite soon. I'm going to be heading out to Ghana for a few weeks to see family, and well, my mum lives out there, so going to do that. And yeah, just the autumn's coming, which is my favorite time of year because I get to start hunkering down and do cuffing season with Bo the dog.
I love that. Well, if but I'm sure we can sort out a dog walk at some point.
Absolutely.
Whereabouts in Ghana does your mum live?
She lives just outside Accra.
Okay, I've been, but not for not for years. I imagine it's changed tons since then.
I've never been. This is the first
You've
time I'm
never
going.
been. It's
No,
beautiful, and
thank you.
the food, so good. What brings you joy? Bo, obviously.
Yeah, Bo. What brings me joy? And on the biggest sense, good people.
Mm,
I mean, there are small things that bring me joy, like doing my yoga of a morning, good music in my house on a Saturday night with just me and, a glass of Prosecco. Those bring me immense amounts of joy. But good people, I like dancing, I like going out, I like, shaking a leg. Um, those things bring me joy. Give me a glass of Prosecco and a good house party and some good music, and I'm yours.
here we go. Right, it's on. What practical takeaways do you have for anyone wanting to carve out either a career in inclusion or create an inclusive space or a project?
I think I, I kind of messed around when I said my best ideas come in the shower, but they do come in the shower, right? But I also believe what I've also believed, if I have my idea, somebody else must be interested in it. It can't be crazy. And there's that if you build it, they will come kind of thing. And I'm like, if you can imagine it, you can do it and you can build it. Surround yourself with people that you love to work with, to
Mm,
create. There's pointless trying to make beautiful things with people that you don't feel beauty with.
yeah,
So for me, it's like if you can dream it, you can do it. Surround yourself with people that you love. And then finally, get on and do it. And if it doesn't work, do it again.
there,
Just keep trying.
keep trying. I've got my final question for you. It's come around so quickly. I could carry on this conversation with you all night, but I'd love to know, do you have any words of encouragement or wisdom for anyone out there to help them get to wherever they're going?
I think, Neil, from my experience of living with HIV, I have learned that I'm not alone in the world. And I think always try to connect, find connection with people. And that may seem hard, because we all go periods of isolation and feeling loneliness and
Yeah.
disconnected, but try to connect. You will connect with somebody. Connection.
Mark, I'm so grateful that we took time out to do this. I have loved learning so much new stuff about you. Thank you for being such a willing guest on Pause and Rewind, and I can't wait to see you soon.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me, Neil. Cheers.
I can't even quite put into words how amazed and bowled over I am by this conversation and just, yeah, the sheer respect and appreciation that I have for Marc. I love diving into the bits about Little Marc, and the things that we didn't know about him as well. We know the impact he's had over the last 3 decades, and the way that he has served the community through his commitment and passion, which just shines through. And it was interesting to hear about him talk about how that wasn't an obvious thing at first, how it was a step-by-step thing until he had that Damascus moment back in 1997 in Washington, where he felt that, in his own words, he was infected to do what he was doing and to make that difference. I love the part where he said, he phoned his mum to tell her that story, and she said something about how it was ridiculous, but deep down she knew that he was right. As an activist, it was interesting to hear Mark explains how activism found him. He started by doing small groups, which led on to the bigger work and the work that he's doing now. And just goes to show the impact that you can have, how he tapped into that confidence and voice that he had as a kid, and grew up in a loving, supporting home held by his mum, and the lessons that his mum and dad taught him along the way. And hearing more about his family dynamics was super interesting. And it's amazing to hear the love that Marc has for his family now. And he feels his mum shaped him to be the person that he was, and was shaped by his community as well, the HIV community, and shown him that anything is possible, despite the fact that the world doesn't always show them the love and care that is deserved and needed. That element of the conversation really smacked for me. Marc continues to do what he does because he knows that the battle is still there. And, he knows that people don't always have the access to the support that they need. And Marc is still very much a fighter. He's still fighting the battle, but in a new career, in a new surroundings, developing a new skill set, but tapping into all that insight that he has gained over the years. And it was really great to hear him talking about finding his own peace and pursuing his professional development, his career, and still his legacy. And it was really lovely to hear him talk about the fact that he sees his career, in his words, as he was the little engine that could. And then those 3 words he uses to describe himself: small but mighty. I just loved it. I loved hearing about the different moments that bring Marc pride in his career and the impact that it's had on his life and so many other people. Yeah, I'm so grateful. Thank you so much, Marc. You are a legend. Yeah, can't wait to see you. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. I hope that this story touches you as much as it touched me. Please do continue to share. This story needs to be out there, and stay tuned for more amazing guests on Pause and Rewind. Please like, subscribe, share, and even comment on Spotify. Cheers.